24 hours before my 65th birthday, my daughter-in-law stood in my kitchen and told me the party was off. She said her mother felt uncomfortable because of me. My son didn't say a word. I just nodded, set down my mug, and made a choice. This house would keep standing, but it wasn't going to be on my back anymore. The news hit exactly one day before I turned 65. My daughter-in-law, Brooke, was standing in my kitchen with her arms crossed, looking everywhere but at me. She told me we had to cancel the dinner I'd planned. Her mother, who was visiting from out of town, apparently felt unsettled. Evidently, my presence during the prep work had been too dominant. Her mother had been in tears, and Brooke decided it was better if we just let the whole thing slide to keep the peace at home. My son Julian stood there like a statue, staring intensely at the coffee maker and nodding slightly. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I just looked at the two of them, and in that precise moment, I finally saw everything I'd been choosing to ignore for the last 3 years. I gave a quiet nod, took my tea, and walked out into the backyard. In this house, the one my late husband and I built with our own hands, I had become an unwanted tenant. Julian and Brooke lived upstairs, but Brooke had slowly, methodically taken over the entire place. My furniture had been shunted to the basement. My daily habits were treated like nuisances. I'd put up with it because I thought family meant making compromises. But this wasn't a compromise. This was a hostile takeover. That afternoon, I sat on the porch and watched Brooke's mother strolling happily through my garden. The supposed crisis was long forgotten, but my birthday had been successfully erased. I didn't feel angry. I felt a remarkable ice-cold clarity. I didn't need to pick a fight or make accusations. I just had to stop being the convenient backdrop for their perfect life. I got up, went into my home office, and locked the door. The plan I was forming didn't require loud words, just consistency. I opened my laptop and started taking my life back. They had no idea I'd shifted gears. They thought I'd just rolled over like I always did. But as they sat there that evening eating the food I'd bought, I knew my time in this house was over. The first step was already taken. The morning after my canceled birthday, my new routine began. Usually, I was up by 6 to clean the espresso machine, empty the dishwasher, and run to the bakery for fresh bagels. Brooke and Julian took it for granted because I was up anyway. This morning, I stayed in bed. I read a book and soaked in the silence. Around 8, I heard frantic footsteps in the kitchen. A moment later, Julian knocked on my door. He looked confused, asking where breakfast was and why the coffee machine wasn't working. I opened the door in my robe, smiled pleasantly, and explained that I was changing my morning habits. I told him the machine probably needed descaling and that the manual was in the junk drawer. Julian blinked, stunned, but said nothing and retreated. 10 minutes later, he and Brooke scrambled out the door, slamming it behind them. I took my time getting dressed and headed downstairs. The kitchen was a disaster zone of coffee grounds and dirty mugs. Usually, I would have grabbed a sponge immediately. Today, I just moved a couple of dirty plates to make a tiny spot for my tea and left the chaos exactly as they'd left it. I had bigger fish to fry. I pulled up my bank statements. Every month, I transferred a significant chunk of change, about $1,500, into a joint household account that Brooke used for groceries. She mostly bought high-end organic stuff and expensive charcuterie that I barely touched. I logged in and canceled the recurring transfer. No big bang, no angry announcement. I just pulled the invisible rug they'd been standing on. Then I grabbed my coat and drove into the city. I had an appointment to see a beautiful little condo. My house had become too big, too loud, and honestly, too disrespectful. It was time to reclaim my space. Sitting at a red light, I imagined Brooke's face when she realized the household account was empty. I couldn't help but smirk. The whole day felt incredibly light. That evening, Brooke came home hauling 2 heavy grocery bags. I was in the living room knitting. She slammed the bags onto the kitchen counter and marched over to me, face flushed. She asked in that condescending tone she liked to use if I'd forgotten to top up the household account. Apparently, her card had been declined at the register. I looked up slowly, set my needles down, and looked her dead in the eye. I calmly explained that from now on, I'd only be paying for my own groceries. After all, I usually cooked and ate by myself anyway. She stared at me like I was speaking a foreign language. Then she tried a frustrated sigh, pointing out that she and Julian work so hard and that I lived here rent-free. I gave her a thin smile and corrected her quietly. I reminded her that I owned the house and they were the ones living rent-free. She gasped, spun on her heel, and stomped upstairs. The next morning, I pushed the boundaries further. There was a large guest room on the main floor that Brooke had slowly turned into a staging area for her Amazon packages and piles of clothes. I neatly moved every single one of her boxes into the hallway, right in front of the stairs. Then I moved my easel and my old books into the room. I locked the door and put the key in my pocket. When she tripped over the boxes that afternoon, she screamed for Julian. He came to me sounding unsure and asked if I could be a little more considerate, claiming Brooke needed that space for her hobbies. I replied cheerfully that the hallway was plenty big and that I'd be using my hobby room myself from now on. I didn't engage in a debate. I just walked past him into the garden to prune my roses. The line was drawn. Brooke knew she didn't own every square inch anymore. The walls of my independence were getting higher and sturdier every day. On Thursday, I drove over to a neighboring suburb. The place I was looking at was a ground-floor unit in a modern building. It had floor-to-ceiling windows, a sunny little patio, and thankfully no stairs. The realtor showed me around, and I knew instantly this was home. It wasn't an escape. It was an upgrade. I'd lived frugally over the last few years, while my son and daughter-in-law financed their lifestyle through my silent sponsorship. My savings account looked very healthy because of it. I signed the lease that afternoon and wired the security deposit immediately. When I got back, the tension in the house was thick enough to cut with a knife. Brooke had realized the utility bills were due. Up until now, I'd paid the electric, water, and gas without a word. This time, I'd rerouted the auto pay to Julian and Brooke's joint account. Julian was standing in the hall holding the mail and scratching his head. He asked if I'd made a mistake with the bills since they were now in his name. I hung up my coat and gave him a sympathetic look. I told him that as the primary users of the house, it only made sense for them to cover the overhead. I was just one person. I barely used any energy. His eyes went wide. He wanted to argue, but he didn't have a leg to stand on. He just wasn't used to being responsible for his own life. Brooke yelled something angry from upstairs, but I wasn't even listening. I took my mail into my private room, sat in my armchair, and thought about my new sunlit apartment. They were finally feeling the weight of reality. Over the next 2 weeks, a lot happened under the radar. I got moving boxes, but not the big obvious ones. I bought small ones that fit easily in my trunk. Every morning, while Brooke was at Pilates and Julian was at the office, I packed. I took my photo albums, my good china, my legal papers, and the fine cashmere sweaters Brooke liked to borrow without asking. I drove the boxes straight to the new place. No one noticed the closets were getting bare. Meanwhile, the stress in the house was skyrocketing. Julian tried twice to talk to me about the increased cost of living. He hemmed and hawed, asking if I could at least chip in for the high-speed internet or the home insurance. I stuck to my guns. I offered to let him cancel my portion of the Wi-Fi since I mostly just read books anyway. He swallowed his pride and walked away. Brooke, on the other hand, went for petty defiance. That weekend, she invited 3 friends over for a loud brunch in my garden without asking, as if she were marking her territory. Instead of getting upset, I just grabbed my purse and went to a cozy cafe downtown. I let them have their brunch and didn't give a damn about the mess. I had already moved out emotionally. My body was still in the house, but my spirit was already in my new sanctuary. When I came home, the dirty dishes were still in the sink, and Brooke was scrolling on her phone on the couch. I walked right past her, grabbed a glass of water, and went upstairs. The atmosphere was freezing, but I had a warm coat made of independence. I was almost there. Monday morning, Brooke was surprisingly chipper. She sat at the kitchen table sipping coffee and showed Julian a fancy invitation. She was planning a huge birthday bash for her mother, the same mother whose discomfort had cost me my 65th. The party was set for Saturday at my house. She'd already booked a caterer and ordered decorations. Julian kept glancing at me, waiting for the explosion. But I just chewed my toast and nodded politely. Brooke took my silence as a win and immediately told me she'd need the whole downstairs and the garden that day. She even suggested I spend Saturday night at a friend's place, so it would be more relaxing for everyone. I looked at her and smiled sweetly. I told her that was a fantastic idea and that I wouldn't be home that weekend anyway. Brooke's face lit up. She thought she'd finally won. She thought she'd successfully evicted me from my own home to make room for her perfect family. What she didn't know, I'd already booked movers for Friday morning. While she was picking out streamers, I was signing a contract with a property management company. I wasn't going to sell the house. I was going to keep it as a rental property. My move-out was the beginning of a new business venture. During those last few days, I even helped her clear out space. Every move I made was actually me packing. I took down my curtains and rolled up my rugs. Brooke was so self-absorbed, she barely noticed the bare walls. The stage was set. Friday morning, right at 8 a.m. Julian and Brooke left for work. Brooke had hurriedly told me to make sure I was there to sign for the liquor delivery for the party. As soon as her car turned the corner, the moving truck pulled up. 2 big guys loaded up my remaining furniture, my bed, my wingback chair, the antique desk. In less than an hour, my section of the house felt hollow. I scrubbed my rooms clean, then I placed a thick envelope right in the center of the kitchen table. There were no long, dramatic letters, no accusations, just a formal notice from the property management company. It stated clearly that I had moved out and that Julian and Brooke could either stay and pay the fair market rent, which was about $3,200 a month, or they had 90 days to vacate. Until then, all utilities and maintenance were their responsibility. The numbers were laid out in black and white. It was a staggering amount for them. I left my 2 sets of house keys on top of the letter. I signed for the party drinks when the delivery guy rang, stacked the crates neatly in the garage, and fulfilled my last duty with a grin. Then I put on my coat, grabbed my bag, and walked out. I pulled the door shut softly. As I drove away, I felt a weight lift off my chest that I didn't even know I was carrying. I left that big brick house behind and headed for my new life. The sun was shining, and for the first time in years, I felt completely, utterly free. I spent Friday night unpacking and enjoying a glass of Cabernet. My phone was on silent on the counter. I knew they'd eventually get home. I pictured Julian unlocking the door, hitting that heavy silence, and finding the envelope. Around 9 p.m., I checked my screen. 18 missed calls from Julian, 6 from Brooke. Endless texts. Julian's first text was just, "Mom." The second sounded panicked. Brooke's messages started with disbelief and ended in a rage, accusing me of sabotaging her mother's party. I didn't reply. I read them like I was reading a news article about someone else. Saturday morning, I had my coffee on my new patio. The sun was warm. Meanwhile, back at the old house, I'm sure it was total chaos. Without my invisible hand, their curated life fell apart. They didn't just have to figure out a party. They had to face the reality that they couldn't afford their lifestyle. The house, which had always felt like their castle, was now just an unaffordable liability. I knew they couldn't cover that rent. They'd spent their paychecks on vacations and luxury cars. The illusion of their wealth crumbled the second I stopped subsidizing it. I didn't feel petty, and I didn't feel guilty. It was just the law of physics. Every action has a reaction. On Tuesday, my doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole and saw Julian. His shoulders were slumped, and he looked like he hadn't slept in days. I opened the door, but kept him in the hallway. He told me the party on Saturday had been a disaster. Brooke's mother left early because the catering was late, and nobody knew how to work the oven. He sounded like he expected me to apologize for not being there to save them. I just watched him. Then he got to the point. He said they couldn't afford the rent I was asking. He begged me to just come back home, saying it was my house and we were family. I crossed my arms and told him without a hint of bitterness that I was exactly where I wanted to be. I told him that being family doesn't mean being a free servant and an ATM. I told him he was a grown man, and it was time he learned to pay his own bills. If they couldn't afford the house, they'd have to find something smaller, just like I did. He stared at me as if he was seeing me for the first time. Not an old woman he could push around, but a woman who knew her worth. I waited until he realized the conversation was over. He finally nodded, turned, and walked away. I felt a tiny pang of sadness. It's never easy to watch your child hit rock bottom, but it was necessary. The era of my silent suffering was over. I stepped back into my bright apartment, locked the door, and smiled. My heart was steady. The future belonged to me again. 2 months later, the dust had finally settled. Julian and Brooke moved out and found a modest 2-bedroom apartment that actually fit their budget. My management company found a lovely family to rent the big house, and the rent checks started hitting my account like clockwork. I celebrated my 66th birthday on my sunny terrace with 3 close friends and a very expensive cake. There were no tears and no drama. Julian called that afternoon. He sounded a bit more mature, a little tired, but more grounded. We kept the call short and civil. It wasn't a movie ending with a big hug, but it was a fresh start based on mutual respect. Brooke still isn't speaking to me, which honestly is a gift in itself. I've learned that true strength isn't about being loud or defensive. It's about knowing what you're worth and quietly, ruthlessly drawing the line. I didn't get revenge. I just stopped paying for their illusions with my life force. Now I sit by my window, sip my tea, and look at the park. I feel a deep, immovable sense of peace. Choosing myself was the best decision I ever made. I'm not a background character in their play anymore. I'm the director of my own life. Every day is a gift I give to myself, free from the weight of other people's expectations. I smile into the silence, knowing I did the right thing. Life is beautiful, quiet, and finally exactly as it should be.